I got a question from a friend of mine. I tried to connect you guys. I don't know if you guys connected or not, but my friend Chris Beck. Is it easier to see UFOs in grays in early hours, 1 hour before sunrise to an hour after sunrise? The ultraviolet of sun is highest in these hours. To see reppies is hour before and hour after sunset because infrared is highest in these hours?
Well, actually, it really depends on what modality they're operating in. So what that means is an interstellar vehicle. Now, let's distinguish between the ones that we have versus the ones that are interstellar. They can phase in and out of this, say, 3D instantaneously. So you could have one right over your building right here. No sensor would pick it up because it's actually shifted, the frequency of it, out of linear space-time. So this is what I call trans-dimensional physics. And then in an instant, nanosecond, it could be 3D, or it could be something in between. So it's a little bit, if you've ever had a rheostat for a dimmer switch or something, you can make it brighter, dimmer, turn it all the way off. So those technologies allow for an object to be fully in 3D or shifted dimensionally, literally, out into another dimension and back. Now, these are not interdimensional, they're more transdimensional because their origins are another star system. There are also interdimensional objects, and those are things from another dimension that is not from the material cosmos, but they can be confused with some of the extraterrestrial phenomena. It's a very complex thing. So in terms of seeing these objects, I think people, when it's not super bright, with the sun, you're going to see more an object that's going to be silhouetted than in bright sunlight.
Okay.
And the other issue, I think, is that the ones that we have can also operate in a way where they are substantially have an electromagnetic field around them that can kind of cloak them, but under certain lighting conditions and radiation, let's call it infrared, ultraviolet, it depends on the condition, you can get a glimpse of them as they're moving. So I think that this gets into understanding the underlying technology and physics of how these objects work. And that's why when we're doing our expeditions where we're going out, making contact and looking, we have a whole set of protocols, and I train people on what to look for, what the phenomenon might be. If you're having cameras, whether it's settings, I don't do camera work, and full disclosure, I'm an idiot with cameras, but so that you have it set properly and also know what to look for. But I think that the technology determines more than the time of day, but the time of day might facilitate. That's why I think when it's still light, but it's not bright light, and that spectrum, you'll see an object more easily.
Okay.
But I think it has to do with, I don't think it has to do with the actual innate occurrence. I think it has to do with
what we can see.
What we can see with these things.
Okay.
Are ours. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. When you're talking trans-dimensional, how do I even ask this? When we're talking other dimensions, what does that mean?
Well, the universe, let's call it the cosmos, it's described by astrophysicists as sort of this 3D thing. Now, if you look at quantum entanglement and the concepts of the universe being a holographic conscious entity, which it is, then you start talking about not just material, but you're also talking about other dimensions that are at refined levels of frequencies and vibration. So the speed of light, the speed of electrons, atoms, what have you, all of that would pertain to what we call the 3D, three-dimensional. If you were to cross over that in frequencies, and this is, again, where you start getting into some very strange WSFM, like I mentioned, phenomenon, then you're talking about other embedded dimensions, but it's not like it's some distant place, it's folded within. So, a hologram, if you look at a hologram of Marilyn Monroe with her dress blowing up, like that, if you were to just zoom in on one little piece of that dress on the edge of her skirt, and zoom in on it, the entire image would be in there, and zoom in again, it's holographic. So you have to kind of get your mind around the cosmos is this conscious quantum hologram. And so there are many, many, many dimensions, not just this plane of 3 dimension, that is all enfolded within it. So a lot of the confusion happens where everything like something weird, like a poltergeist event, will be conflated with something extraterrestrial. Well, it isn't. You know, it was someone who, like in the ER, I had this happen once, some guy that was killed, couldn't save him, you know, it was murder, and he was angry, and at 3 a.m, he started taking all the stuff out of the cabinets. But he wasn't there. It was just his spirit. Weird stuff. So that kind of phenomenon isn't extraterrestrial, it's interdimensional. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay, so I'm trying to do some very kind of crude analogies, but the confusion comes in is that if you're an interstellar capable civilization, which means you're going from point A in the cosmos to here, B, it's like if this were a piece of paper, you're not going a straight line across the paper, you're folding the paper, being space-time.
Okay.
And so these 2 points are here.
I'm enlightened now.
And so, but in the process of doing that, this sort of bending and altering space-time, you then bump up against and cross these other dimensions. And this is sort of the intersection between what some people call metaphysics and physics, or the conscious worlds and the worlds of light, if you will, the mystics would call astral, and extraterrestrial technologies. And it's a very interesting intersection. I find that the most interesting part of this whole subject, but it quickly, you have to be, you go in the crazy town way too quickly with a lot of people out there who don't know enough to talk about it intelligently, in my opinion. But it's also dangerous, and here's why it's dangerous. Those capabilities can be technologically stimulated to occur. It's like the Skinwalker Ranch. After a certain cell of this covert group got hold of that thing, they started setting up phenomena there. It was absolutely man-made, high-end electronics, but interdimensional. It's like the show Stranger Things. I've never seen it, but that's based on some weird stuff that went on at Montauk on eastern Long Island, the Montauk projects. And we know what those are. I know guys who've been in laboratories where they have a toroid or one of these devices, and suddenly they're pulling in spooky-looking creatures that look like they came out of the ninth ring of hell, and they literally become 3D and are running around the lab. Weird stuff. All right, so the high end of the WSFM is this sort of thing. But that can be used in a deceptive indication and warning. It can be used in a way that everyone on planet Earth would think that it's alien, and it isn't.
I see what you mean.
Okay, so this is the real danger in all of this not being disclosed and known, particularly by policymakers and the government and Pentagon and all these folks, is that they're not going to be able, they're going to be so easily gaslit and deceived by people presenting all kinds of phenomena, plural, as extraterrestrial when it isn't. Because they have mastered the ability of this, what's called stagecraft. That's literally what it's called in some circles. And this gets back to this whole question of Project Bluebeam, where they could stage. But what their capabilities are way beyond what most people think they are. And I began working with some of these geniuses back in the early 90s that I met who in late 1950s and 60s had figured this out. So the electronics and the very high-end electromagnetic field systems that can do this were unpacked pretty well by between 1955 and 1965, in that decade.
So with the different dimensions, so there's another dimension in this room right now, and we just can't.
Within this room, folded. It's the enfoldment. It's quantum entanglement. So, you know what Einstein called the spooky effect, where the same particle be in two places at once. Mm-hmm. But visualize that at every point in space and time. At this level of quantum entanglement, you have access to any other point in space and time, but also these other dimensions, up to and including the most rarefied, what some people would call the conscious being, the unbounded consciousness. It's all folded within this in what I call the real cosmology, understanding the cosmology, which is way beyond astrophysics, current astrophysics. But I think that's the part of this where when you start experimenting with and reverse engineering an extraterrestrial vehicle, their communication systems are not based on the speed of light like our cell phones, right, or video. They're based on this understanding of the cosmos because they've lived for millennia in that understanding. And so this is why, you know, we talk about the fact that they have technologies that interface with directed thought. I call it technology-assisted consciousness, and consciousness that assists the technology, so they can interface bioelectric field and thought, and they navigate the spacecraft.
Shit.
Really, really cool stuff. I mean, you know, Elon Musk is trying to do some stuff with Neuralink, but he's still using wires and at the speed of light. But the idea would be the same, that your thought could actuate to a technological interface that would then not only be used in communication, because what's that? The speed of thought versus the speed of light.
Yeah.
But think about why that's so important. If you're from the Andromeda galaxy, which is 2.5 million light years from here, at the speed of light, your cell phone, it would take 2.5 million years for a signal to get there, and another 2.5 million years for them to answer, and you hear it. It's 5 million years. So when I talk about this, I say there are certain technological thresholds you have to have crossed if you're an extraterrestrial interstellar civilization. Those technologies have, the good news is we understand them, and they could be used to great purpose on Earth. Energy generation, healing, all kinds of things, medical. But right now, they're in the hands of the worst group of sociopaths that have ever lived, and they dwarf, by far, Stalin or Hitler in terms of their intention and their capabilities, way beyond. It's not the buffoonery of the Third Reich. It's just the high-tech, very dangerous end. Now, this to me is, as a doctor, I tell people this is like a knife, or, you know, I can use a knife to put butter on my bread, or I can use it to slit your throat. Now, so technology is neutral. It's the consciousness and the intention of those who wield it, who have it. Mm-hmm. In this situation right now, it's the worst of all worlds, because you have the most amazing, wonderful technologies in the hands of the worst group ever that have quite a bit of malice and intention. So this is what I think has to be fixed, and that's why the Disclosure Project is trying to move this along. First, yes, now we've established UFOs are real. Well, that was known in the 50s, 60s, 40s. But now what's behind all that? Unpacking all the detail. And the reason the scientific end of this is so important, even for operations, is that this group of illegal covert human projects, they have surveillance, communication systems, transport systems, and sciences that are. Ben Rich, the week before he died, told James Goodall, you heard him at our conference, one of the last men to talk to him. He says, anything that you've seen in Star Trek and can imagine, we've done at the Lockheed Skunk Works. And he said, not at Area 51, but at the desert base, the underground facility.
For now, back to the underground facility.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one at Dugway. It's what this gentleman firsthand had not been in it. He has the name of a scientist, senior scientist, U.S. government, that was at the Dugway facility, and he said that the complex that's underground goes out. It's about 1,300 square miles, not acres, miles.
1,300 square miles.
Yeah.
What's in there?
All this stuff, the technologies, the craft, operations. We know that I had a man who was out there who had special night vision. He was special operations and embedded, but he was a scientist. And he was out there, and wee hours, there were these massive triangular objects, silent, launching from that area, but underground, and would come out over the range. No lights on them, totally, fully operational. And, you know, those are one category of the man-made advanced technology platforms, or alien reproduction vehicles, some people call them. There are quite a few out there at Dugway.
These government documents from the U.S., Canada, Australia, Russia, and the U.K., what are some of those documents?
Oh, they run the whole gamut. For example, I have a document, wasn't declassified, but it was provided to me by a source from Area 51, Nellis, and it lists as of the early 90s. I got it in the 90s, all the code numbers and code names that were on a security alert because there were a group of civilians who were trying to spy on the range, where they had to shut everything down because it was a large group. And it was a security alert, but it was an NRO document, National Reconnaissance Office document. And it had key names on it. It had Magi on it, the Majority Joint Intelligence Committee, or MAGIC. It had Cosmic Ops on it, Royal Ops. It had Blackjack Control on it. It had key actionable intelligence, and that's one of the documents I gave to some of the folks in the White House over the years, or Pentagon, because it's a legitimate document that actually gives specific code word and numbers that were out in that particular area. And it's still there. I mean, it's not like you pick up an asset like that and move it to where. So we know where they are. And that's why our 145 facilities, I've just learned of a new one that we'll be putting on that map soon. I'm supposed to be taken there.
Where's this?
I can't say where, but right now.
Can we put the map up?
Yes, and you put the map up, you'll see many of them are places people know. They know Edwards Air Force Base, but where? Where do you go to at the Nellis Range? It's a huge range, Air Force Base. And then the Nevada test site, which is where we tested nuclear weapons, going north. But out there's some very key assets. And there's a Delta Force Hilo base out there that's used for retrieving extraterrestrial vehicles and retrieving downed, accidentally crashed man-made ones that malfunction. So we have a man on our team who was on a retrieval operation initially for conventional aircraft, jets, for their classified components. And then he got read into an operation retrieving the man-made ones, which blew his mind, the Raytheon and Northrop ones. Then he got read into the ones that are, he was on one operation where we stunned one of these extraterrestrial vehicles. This one I showed at the event. And it didn't crash. It got stunned and landed out there on the range, the Nevada test range. And they were moved in Helos to retrieve it. And that interesting account of that, it began to come back to life, and an opening came out of it, and it looked like a fruit roll-up came down, and a couple of extraterrestrials emerged that he literally was in 3 or 4 feet of them. We have the drawing of them, of what they look like. But what happened is that at that point, that craft was being checked by helicopters in the air, as well as one of these ARVs, man-made ones, but triangular. When this thing began to sort of glow, reddish, and come to life, boom, our aircraft took off. Now the boots on the ground there and the choppers on the ground, after a few minutes, they were all, I know this sounds like Star Trek, they were all teleported back to the Hilo base instantly.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They weren't harmed. None of them were harmed. But apparently this whole event convinced this particular operator to get out of that system, because he knew what he sensed from these ETs was that they were completely benign, very much here to help us, and we were doing horrible things to them. And they also said, we know what you're doing. We're not going to allow you to do this much longer. It was sort of a warning. That happened in 2000 and, but that was 2010, 11 time period.
So what's your goal with the Disclosure Project?
Well, our goal is, first of all, to get this information to the key policymakers and people in the government who have responsibility for our national security, but also in other countries as well, and to the public so that they understand the difference, in my opinion, between the false information being purveyed, which is the dominant information that's out on the internet and Hollywood and shows, and the real information that needs to be understood by the public so that the public isn't deceived. So we have both an internal governmental objective to guide the government in understanding this and getting them as much detailed, actionable intelligence as possible. Like the details, and this is how they've gotten this far. The reason the bill that was just came out of committee in the Intelligence Committee is because they now understand, if you read that bill that is given sort of a safe harbor 6 months amnesty period for these corporations and people to come forward or they'll be prosecuted. That is in the bill that left committee. And I've been pushing for this for a long time. The first time I recommended it was in 1993 to Bill Clinton, and nobody wanted to do it. Now it's going to happen, but that sets a clock. And so the Disclosure Project's objective is to give the legal government of the United States that we have allegiance to, and that we, the people, the public, the information, so that these rogue and very criminal activities can be brought under proper supervision and control, access control. And that's not the case right now. And it's dangerous that it isn't. So it's a very big step that first in December, they signed this law allowing whistleblowers to come forward through the Pentagon process, which is a top secret SCIF situation. But now this bill is going to explicitly state that these corporations, anybody having exotic materials, clearly referring to extraterrestrial type materials, technologies, bodies, those have to be disclosed and turned over to the legal U.S. government, or they will then be subject to prosecution criminally. So that's a 6-month window now. So that clock has started.
That's a 6-month window.
Yep.
And you're also going to make all of this, which a lot of it already is, open source information.
Yes, if we could get some... You have to imagine myself and my wife and a few volunteers trying to scan, organize 8-10 terabytes of data, and then create a database system that's searchable, and then eventually get it on the internet. Now, what we do have to redact, the unredacted archive I'm giving to the top investigators in the Congress and the Pentagon group. The White House got a redacted version because they're not really leaning into this much yet, which they should be. Mm-hmm. But I have someone in the White House military office that we're providing information to. But the redacted one, just to be clear, the only thing we're holding back are the personal names of these, hundreds of whistleblowers who don't want their names known, mm-hmm. Except under certain conditions. And also, if they have a DD-214, I'm not going to release in a non-secure manner. So the folks who have the unredacted, those go into a SCIF, they go into a vault, they have it. Now, I will say on the record, anyone who says the U.S. government is not in possession of all the facts and the actual intelligence to get to the bottom of this is a liar or ignorant. They're either a liar or they're ignorant, because that was handed off 3 weeks ago, all of it. So there's actually no excuse now. The only excuse they'd have now is that they're part of a cover-up, in which case they should be prosecuted. And I'm saying even the people in the Aero office and the Pentagon, they either move on this and do it with integrity, or they should be prosecuted.